So, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Help, I'm a Camera Nerd, the podcast. I'm here today with Mark. As you guys know, Mark, also Help, I'm a Camera Nerd. I'm Anderson, and how you can see my YouTube channel is Films by AW. But I'm here today with a special guest. Our first guest, the one, the only, Kyle Martin Clark.
Hello, nice to be here.
Kyle is a sound recordist and sound mixer. I've worked with Kyle for 12 years now. We've worked on hundreds of jobs together, but he's worked on hundreds of commercials, documentaries, several feature films. All of my short films, either as a sound recordist or the sound designer. He's someone I trust dearly, and he's a good friend. So yeah, welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, that's really special being the first guest. So I hope I meet expectations.
I'm sure you'll surpass them. So obviously we've been very camera centric so far with this podcast, talking about the types of cameras, the different formats to it. But sound is 50% of a movie, and I always find that it gets neglected. Now, tell me, before we go into your thoughts on that, tell me a little bit about your journey, how you became a sound recordist, how you got in the industry, and how you finding it now.
Okay, so yeah, starting from the beginning. So I often like to sort of make a joke about all sound recordists being failed musicians. And that often kind of is the case. A lot of people working via music, and that's definitely what happened with me. I did my undergrad at Preston Uni on a music practice course. But I always love recording, and even looking back now, even then, one of the major focuses for me was always just like, I just want to get in the studio and I just want to record this. I'm not as bothered about playing this live. I'm not as bothered about gigging. I just want to record these sounds. And so after that, I did a master's at Edinburgh Uni in sound design, which takes me much more into the studio, much more about post, and that was my first real sort of experience working with sound for picture, I guess. And other bits and pieces as well, stuff like binaural sound and audio for games and things like that. And I guess the path is fairly normal in how people get into this. So I was doing that, and there was a film school, Edinburgh College of Art, and they were doing short films, and everybody on their course wanted to be a camera operator or a director, so they'd come to our unit and ask for people to record. So started recording for short films there with absolutely zero idea what I was doing. And kind of that's just the way it goes, really. And then, Anderson, I ran into you and met you when I'd moved back to Manchester after my master's, and I was looking for more short film kind of work and looking to get into the industry. And from that point on, it was just kind of a slow slog, really, and learning everything. Every time I'd be on set, I'd learn something new, or learn that I needed this piece of gear, or learn how to do something one way, and it kind of just, 15 years later, have some idea what I'm doing, maybe. And that's kind of where I am. And in terms of where I am now, very lucky to have a lot of lovely clients like you, Anderson, and I get to work with both Anderson and you, Mark, really regularly, and it's great. Those shoots were always really good fun. They're definitely more fun than some shoots I'm on. But it's great. The job's great. It's really varied. I go to a lot of different places, do a lot of different things, and yeah.
So I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
So we basically talk about kit a lot, and we've talked about our journey with kit. So talk us through what did you start with and what have you ended up with?
Oh wow, okay. So yeah, I've definitely got a massive personal journey with my own kit, and there's been times, when I did a feature film in Taiwan, and all I'd have with me was my Peli case and my recorder and all my recording gear, and then a few t-shirts and a few box shorts and a few jeans, and it was the kit means a lot to me emotionally because I've lived with this stuff, slept next to it doing some of these feature films and stuff, and just it's great. But when I started, even in 10 years or 15 years, the change in kit has been absolutely crazy. And I should mention that before I talk about what I started on, because when I think back to what I started on, it's crazy. And I'm sure it was the same for you guys, you know. This was just kind of 5 years or so before the DSLR revolution that really kicked off, you know, the entire kind of like people making short films with shallow depth of field because they've got DSLRs and 7Ds and 5Ds. And yeah, I started with my first recorder was a Fostex FR2 LE, which was a compact flash, 2 channels, literally 2 channels, 2 inputs, so 1 boom most of the time. And I bought that with a Rode NTG3, which had a 10-year warranty on it. And I was using my, I think, Beyerdynamic DT770 studio headphones, which were the comfiest headphones in the world, but crazy to go out with because they're so heavy and big. And that's how I started. And I used that rig on my first short films. If people wanted radio mics, they could have one radio mic. So you have to choose who you want that radio mic on. And yeah, most of the time I just do it all to boom. And Anderson, you know that's carried on for me. That philosophy has carried on for me. It's taken me right through 15 years because boom sounds best, and we can talk about that a bit later. But yeah, so FR2, and then I did a bit of orchestral recording and moved up to an Edirol R4, which was a 4-channel. Great little recorder. I really missed that recorder, actually. It had really lovely preamps. And then as soon as I started to take things a little more seriously, I got a Sound Devices 702, and that kind of started my love affair with Sound Devices, really, which has carried on right to this day. So that's been a 10-year allegiance to Sound Devices, really. From the 702, that was another 2-channel, but the preamps on that were so great. They just sounded so warm and nice. And after that, where did I go after that? I think after the 702, it was the Sound Devices 633, which was like, I say that was my first proper, really, really professional bit of kit designed for audio for video. Loads of inputs, loads of outputs, timecode inputs, you know, stuff. All that stuff's really common on all these devices now. But back then, to have a recorder with timecode was like, wow, this is a big deal, and I've really upgraded here. And now I'm on I've still got the 633. I use it as a backup. I've got a Zoom F8, which is an 8-channel. Is it F8N? Which is kind of another backup for when I need more channels than the 633. But my main recorder's actually changed to the MixPre 10T, I think. Yeah. And yeah, that's 8 channels now. 8 channels in a tiny box. It's smaller than my original recorder, which was 2 channels, and it's 8 channels and it's SD card. The preamps all sound lovely, and it's unthinkable to have 8 channels in a little box like that. If someone said to me 15 years ago, you'll be able to get 8 channels in, literally the smallest package for less money than the original recorder cost, relatively, I'd have said that's crazy. And the other thing is, throughout those years with the recorders, obviously my other kit grew, so I added on some stock mics. You've got the 416, the industry standard kind of boom mic, which is just, you can drop it, you can have it in bad weather, and it just keeps on going. That took over the NTG3 for me pretty quickly, but the NTG3 was a great first boom mic because it's a little more gentle if you're off axis, and we can talk about that a bit later as well. But it just means as you're building your skill up as a boom operator, and you might miss your sort of best position with the mic when you're trying to capture voices. The NTG3 was just a little bit more forgiving with that. And now, the boom mic CS3E I use a lot, and an MKH50 for interiors. And radio mics, of course, and timecode gear and wet weather gear. And so the great thing about sound that's different, and from what I've heard you guys talking about on the podcast already, is that everything in sound sort of costs, it's kind of manageable. So as you get a bit more work, you can throw a couple of grand at a mic or a couple of grand at a radio, and you can kind of build your kit up slowly, which is a great advantage over having to, drop tens of thousands on one lens, for instance. And so you really get a chance to play and sort of see what works for you, and then build up your sound kit kind of as you like it, really.
I was going to ask that, Kyle, like, because you sound like we've talked about this tons of times, but it's like you built up based on what you needed. You saw, okay, actually, these couple of jobs, I would have needed that mic, or client asked for this, or okay, more mics. I needed more mics because I wanted to live more people up.
Yeah.
I know, we've talked a lot about that, but yeah, would you, for the podcast, tell me a little bit about that, how, you would learn more, and as you learned more, you bought more. It wasn't like a vanity purchase or anything like that.
Yeah, so I mean, some of these were vanity purchases, Anderson. Like, you need to get that.
We all make vanity purchases. Yeah, we all do that.
We all have those.
So I was lucky enough, and kind of looking back now, ignorant enough to go down a certain path, because I started doing a few short films for people that were involved in doing commercials, and that led to me getting on some commercials super early, and these were TV ad commercials, so these were quite big kind of jobs, and I didn't know what I didn't know, so I'd go on these jobs and kind of, I remember one commercial I went on with just the boom, 2-channel recorder, one boom. It was I won't mention any brand names, but the advert had one word for each scene, which was the name of the brand. And it was so lucky that was the case, because I had the boom, and I had no way of really getting any of the kind of audio other than what I could get on the boom. So I did that, and I remember someone sort of mentioned to me at the time, they were like, can we get a radio on that person? I was like, get a radio on that person, like, no, not really, and I'd go up to the camera, and kind of the camera person would be like, so are we just jamming time code? And I'd be like, I'm not sure exactly what that means. So I'd be there, I'd get my mobile phone out, and I'd be like, time code for this, like, really crazy. That is, I do not advise starting out that way. So
I don't laugh. Sorry.
But I mean, every time somebody asked me a question like that, it would be the last time it was ever asked. I'd go home and it'd be like, right, they asked me about that thing, right? What's that thing? They asked me about that thing. What's that thing? I need to get hold of these things, and I'd plan, and that's how the package kind of evolved, and now people don't say things that I don't understand. So I think I'm at a place, where I have the kit that I need. And obviously now, like, I've seen other soundies, and I've spoke to other soundies, and I've been in the game like quite a long time and worked with lots of people. So, but yeah, I mean, that's how my package was built up, and how it started, really. Does that answer your question? I think I've forgotten what your question was.
I mean, it's I always remember that story. You've told me several times, and it makes me chuckle, because we've all been there. When you're starting out, you're like, oh yeah, I can do that. Of course I can. And then you're kind of not blagging, but
they tell you to do
like,
it. Don't you think? They tell you, I mean, I remember at uni, they tell you to do that. They're like, never say you can't do something.
Mm-hmm.
Just say you can do it and then figure it out. And that's like, that's how they tell you to learn a lot of the time. And we've all been in situations. I've been in situations with a 100%. Camera before where it's not been working, and the people have been walking in to start, and you just like, I remember the AC saying, what are we going to do? And I just went, we'll just get it working. And you just get it working. You just figure it out. And that's part of the job. Although, yes, some situations try and avoid, but yeah.
I mean, it's the beauty of being naive and being young and being able to deal with stress, right? Is that you just sort of are baptized into it, and it's just, you make it work, and we've all made it work, and eventually now it looks like we know what we're doing, so you get there in the end.
Touch wood. Speak for yourself, Kyle. I'm just yeah, guys, we could just we'll just get that shot and just be like, I'm like, Mark, can we get that? Yeah, it's great, let's get that. So I mean, going on, I guess, Mark, I know you have another question. Sorry, I'll jump. I didn't mean to jump in. What do you find? Let's talk about being on set. Let's talk about working with camera-centric people like me and Mark often are.
Mm-hmm.
What do you find like? Is there any frustrations with that? Because so much of the emphasis in movies are, what camera are we shooting on? What does it look like? What does it look like? But then if it doesn't sound good, I always say, if it doesn't sound good, the footage looks worse. It's a psychological thing. But what do you find frustrating, or do you find that frustrating that sometimes sound is overlooked?
So I'd say so everything's dependent on the crew that you're with. I wouldn't like to make any generalizations and say this is always a constant frustration on set, because it's so dependent on who you're working with, who the camera people are, what their vision is, what their kind of understanding of what's possible is. And so there is some kind of constant themes, and I think things have evolved as things have gone on. Like when we started shooting and when I started shooting, everything was done much more on one camera. Right until the kind of DSLR explosion I was talking about before. It kind of went from one camera to as many cameras as you actually wanted, to be shooting with. And the multicam stuff is a problem if you're a sound person, especially if you're trying to get things on a boom, because you get to a certain kind of wide lens and you just can't really get a boom in and get the sound that you want for that shot. I think the constant frustrations are, and I've said this to you both a few times, is that when you're concentrating on the image and everybody on set's concentrating on the image, everybody's trying to make that image beautiful and the best it can be. And with sound, you're just kind of constantly working against, you're trying to do the least amount of damage in terms of you're trying to get the best sound possible in a bad situation. Because not being able to have a mic, kind of where I've got my mic here, is a bad situation. So you're sort of fighting these elements to get the best sound that you possibly can. And obviously have no mics in shot. Lots of different movement. So, I mean, that is the art of sound recording too. So if I say it's a frustration, that is literally the skill that you need to develop, is being able to get usable sound, good sound, in difficult situations. So I guess it's one thing, I really do have to say it depends on the crew that you're with. I've been with some crews and some kind of directors, and they've made it pretty clear to me one way or another that kind of, they're not really interested in hearing about any problems that I've got on set. And as I've got older and got more experience, I've just learned to sort of relax about that and be like, well, look, I'll do my best. I'll do what I'm capable of, but it's your production at the end of the day. And if a production has to let people get usable sound in the same way they have to let locations work for people, they have to let art department work properly. They need to give people time. And so it's the collaboration thing, right? And the problems and frustrations come when there's a problem with the collaboration side of the production. I think Mark and Anderson, working with you two over the years, there's you really get a feel. I almost think it's like being in a band where you start to kind of, what the other person's going to play before they do it, and what they mean by that little look. And I think that's really important. It's really important to have a relationship with the rest of the people in your crew. And I guess one of the frustrating things is getting kind of put into a crew and expected to work, in such a fluid way with people that you don't really know. You just met them that morning and you don't really know how they work. And everyone's got their own kind of little idiosyncrasies and little ways of doing things that are different.
Yeah.
I guess a major frustration for me, actually, that I could say was kind of one would be when you're jumping around from one crew to another and the kind of set discipline is changing. So things like boards, not boarding, missing end boards, not being worried about sync, rolling and cutting without kind of saying. There's a lot of these different things, and then you are kind of, as a soundy, you're kind of having to catch up and read all of these things, and there is tools to help. The camera has a red light on when it's recording most of the time, so you can, I keep half an eye on that, and I'm like, right, it's rolling. But things are a lot more helpful and a lot more easy if there's just a bit of on-set kind of discipline and the kind of stuff that you taught at film school. And I think some people just get into a habit of dropping some of those habits as they get through, or if they're not used to working with a sound recordist, they're not going to say cut and I'm rolling, I'm cutting when they do it, because why would they? But it's really little things in a collection of little things that make things very easy or very hard, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because there's definitely like as like a DP and an operator, I'm always looking and hoping that the sound person, whoever that is, if they want to know what the frame is, to just ask, or if they want to see the frame, then ask. And I think that's a completely valid thing to do. I think that, if you can't get a camera feed to the sound person, then the least you can do is let them, or tell them where the frame is, give them an edge of frame so that they can, so they're not going to dip in. Because if they don't know the edge of frame, how difficult is it to not just accidentally dip your boom in? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's 100% true. Like, you do get a sort of a slight feel when so I sort of base everything at 50mm is like my, my neutral lens, and I kind of think, well, that's roughly what I can kind of see. And you sort of know when you're switching lenses, I kind of have an idea of how wide or how, tight that lens is going to go now. But yeah, sure, man, you still need, I mean, it's impossible to know, like, and that's why I'll always say, I'm in shot here, during setup. And I guess that's the other thing, Anderson, about discipline too, like setups and things are so important for sound. Because like you say, if you drop that frame in, if your boom comes in a setup, it's absolutely fine. But if you don't have that chance to kind of not necessarily rehearse, but at least have a kind of like rough block and a bit of time to sort of set up, it's so helpful for so many things.
I think you make a great point there about that continuity, that discipline. I mean, the last episode we talked about that when you're shooting on film, you learn to have a certain discipline on set. Everything was communicated well, because the idea, again, it was because we're a camera-centric industry, because there's a limited amount of film you have, you can't waste a lot of time. But in the move to digital and shooting more, everything more on digital cinema cameras, we've lost a little bit of that discipline, because you could just press record and yeah, it's fine. Or we could time record it and yeah, it's fine. But it's like there still needs to be a certain amount of communication. There still needs to be communication on set. And I'm a filmmaker. I like to get everything on the day as much as possible. I'm not a big fan of ADR, because you don't know if you're going to get that actor again. You don't know. You don't want to live, having to get things in post again, because it becomes frustrating, especially when you're working at a tight schedule or whatever. I prefer to get everything on the day. So, it's like, I always say, Kyle, have we got that? And you told me that's not a usual thing. And to me, that's mind boggling. Like, why not? Obviously there's times where, like, if you're doing a stunt and it's a wide shot, and, I'll maybe ask, like, oh, Kyle, can we just get that on a, record that after as a bit of ADR, on set ADR, not 3 months of post-production later. Because I think, it's you just have to know when you have to know when you not pick your battles, but you got to know when it's appropriate to do something. And I know you often say, yeah, I'll be fine. Then we got something that you can see it in the background. Don't worry. And I think that communication, that continuity is just so important. It's so important. That's why I'm so stubborn, and I use the same crews over and over again, because obviously you guys have become great friends, but it's just like, I know the shorthand I'll have, and I'll be like, oh, okay, you can do this. I know what I'm going to get. And there's, as a producer director, the fear of the unknown is the biggest fear you'll have. You're like, I don't know what the sound is going to be like. I don't know if they're going to communicate well, or I don't know if they say they got it, are they just afraid to tell me they haven't got it because they've had bad experiences? I'm a continuity guy personally. But yeah, I think that's really a really interesting point. Mark, or I'll ask one question, I'll let you go.
Okay.
Sorry, we're learning, guys. We're learning how to have a guest.
This is your third question in a row. Third question.
No, I'll let you go. I'll let you go, Mark.
Okay. All right. It's actually, you said something to me on the last shoot that we were on together. And I just want to kind of get you to say that, but there's more as well. So, like, what are some of the biggest things you've learned being a sound person?
So I was lucky when I was starting out, and this is something I recommend to anyone who's starting out, is to look for a mentor. I'm not in a situation and haven't been where I could get onto dramas and things, but I was lucky enough to get a sound mixer reply to me, and I must have emailed so many. And he took me on a few jobs with him. He took me on a few commercials and stuff. And this was really my first time where I got to see, professional working sound recordist doing his thing. And I remember so well, we were doing a job in Wales and we were doing an outside shoot. And it wasn't summer and I don't think it was spring, so it was pretty rough. And we were going up a mountain. And we were supposed to record these people going up a mountain with radio mics on. We were following them with our bags on. And this other sound mixer to me kind of said, when we were having the meeting the night before, he was like, this is going to be a really challenging shoot. This is going to be like windy. It's going to be rainy. My job here is to manage expectation. And when he said that, I remember just thinking like, wow, up until now, it's been, if I can't get that sound, then there's something wrong with me. And he really made it clear to me that it was like, you need to manage expectation of what's possible in a job, getting sound, and do that kind of beforehand, before a job takes place. So when somebody tells you to do something impossible, it's your job to manage the expectation that might not be doable like that. And yeah, that probably is one of the biggest lessons that I've ever got, because it's signaled a change for me personally from kind of being like, if I can't get sound in that situation, I'm a bad sound recordist, to being like, if I can't get sound in that situation, we need to think about another way to do it, because some things are physically impossible, So we need to be, going back to that collaboration, I need to be thinking about how I can make that sound work for people in an edit, So if we've got a wide shot of people climbing a mountain in wind and rain, we don't necessarily have to be hearing them talking there at that point, or we could get some of those lines later, or we could get some of those lines on a close-up. And when you start thinking about it in terms of expectation like that, and in terms of expectation of kind of what your client asks you to get and what you can or can't get, that really kind of changes. And I think it's quite a grown-up way to kind of approach a situation, rather than just sort of like, going quiet and being like, oh, well, how am I going to do this? And not being sure that it's possible to get good sound in that situation. So yeah, that was a massive lesson.
What would you say you've because you've said that you've learned over time little idiosyncrasies of, you kind of understand the field of view of a lens, or when it's recording and when you have those cues. What's the biggest way you've seen cameras changed? I mean, this is after obviously film to digital, but what's been the biggest change you've seen from your perspective when you're coming in cruiser working, let's say the last 5 or 6 years? Let's not go all the way back to the DSLR, but maybe the last 5 or 6 years. What's been the biggest change you've seen from your perspective on the camera side?
You mean on the technology, or?
Oh, yeah, technology, or how you're working with it. Is it easier? Is it harder? That kind of.
Yeah, well, I guess from sort of my side, not that much has changed in that respect. I kind of like think of certain epochs, and some of them, you had like after the DSLR thing, you had like the red epoch, when it was like, that was a troublesome camera for me, like quite famously with sound recordists, that was a troublesome camera because it had quite a loud fan. It had no standardized cabling, so your timecode ins and your audio ins were, you had to buy special cables or make them up. Things like that are difficult. Now things are becoming a bit more, I mean, so many people are shooting on stuff like Sony's now, which, as far as I think, they're all standardized kind of connectors, so you have sort of BNC ins for your timecode, and you've got your just XLR or mini XLRs for audio in, and I mean, things like that make my job so much easier. If there's standardized cabling to stuff and you just have one set of cables and things, and they stay in your sound bag and you take them to a job and the camera's got all the inputs on it and it's all standardized, then that makes my job loads easier. Yeah. I'd say from another kind of technical standpoint, there seems to be a lot more people just operating one camera rather than maybe having an assistant and stuff these days. I don't know if that's something you've noticed, but it's quite common for me to have less operators than cameras on a job, which kind of affects me too, because it means if I'm trying to jam that or get audio in or sync those cameras somehow, there's less people around to help me do that. And I don't have cameras, I don't own cameras, so sometimes when I go in to to jam the cameras at the beginning of the day. Like, I don't know my way around the menus, and having somebody there, an operator that just knows how to get into that menu and do the start of that process, at least, like, that saves me loads of time. You know, I don't have to be Googling and trying to read the camera manual. But from my side, yeah, no, the technology itself, the camera technology itself, from a sound perspective, hasn't really changed that much.
Wow, that's interesting. This is more about the workflow as opposed to the technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to be fair, the major workflow change that's come in the last 5 or 6 years has been the waveform syncing, as far as I'm concerned. Because in the past, if I couldn't get a feed into a camera or a time code feed into a camera, unless we were boarding, that camera wouldn't be able to be synced, and that's crazy. That is not what an editor wants. That is hours and hours in an edit for people trying to match. And I mean, Mark's shaking his head. If you've done that, and I've been told by editors who have done that, and they all have the same look that Mark has right now.
Yeah.
And you know, you need to. We can't have that as a. It can't be a situation in post. You know, people need to be able to sync up stuff straight away and get on with an edit. I think.
Yeah. There were times, I remember times where you're trying to sync someone's dialogue off a word that they've said or the shape of their mouth. And it just, like you said, it adds on just hours and hours and hours. And now it's a case of highlighting the waveforms and clicking sync, and it's done. And even that has got so much better over the past 5 years, because when it first came out, it didn't work quite as well. But now, I mean, 99% of the time it's working perfectly for you. So,
and when it started, right, that was Pluralize, I think. Wasn't it a plugin that started, and then I think is it built into Premiere and everything now most of the time? And that's probably the biggest workflow thing, because now when people pull out a secret camera that's not been on the call sheet or talked about with me, if we're indoors and it's got an internal mic, I can relax about that.
Yeah, and a lot more cameras now as well are being built with internal mics. I remember the Scarlett had no internal mic, and I plugged this little crappy, like, tiny mic to just try and get some kind of scratch audio. But now I think most cameras that you buy will come with some form of mics on the camera for you to just be able to sync. I'm guessing really that's what that's for you. Some kind of way to line them up.
There is a caveat with that technology, which is if you kind of rely on that as a workflow and then everybody runs out and tries to get a shot outside, you have the wind hitting the different camera mics at different times, and you totally lose the ability to be able to sync those cameras up. So you need to have something in your back pocket if that's going to happen, whether that's a timecode slate or you just ask people to board, or clap even, you know, in front of the camera, just something to make sure that you've got a visual sync point there too.
I know one of the things that we used, Kyle, on one of the last shoots we did, is because I always carry a little Rode Go with me. Yes. We didn't use it for sound, but we used it to get that kind of audio. You could basically send me a feed then, and we still obviously took your sound and synced that up, but that just gave us a much easier way to sync, because that little Rode Go mic sits on the camera, it doesn't take up any room, batteries last ages, and gives you that kind of way to sync nice and easily. So I mean, I guess camera operators and stuff, that you're kind of getting those bits of tech that are a lot cheaper than a radio mic now, and you can kind of use in a pinch for those scenarios.
Yeah, all those little toys are just, you know, great. And that would be your problem solver in the windy environment as well there if you were relying on waveform sync otherwise. So, yeah, all these little gadgets.
What would you say also, I mean, with those little gadgets, I'm using one right now, for instance, and obviously because it's getting a lot cheaper and more accessible to camera operators, they're saying, oh, well, you know, we won't need a camera, we won't need a sound recorders here, or we won't need that, we'll just get that on this. What would you say to that? I mean, we've spoken about this several times, and you mentioned, obviously, the job of a sound recorder isn't just about getting clear sound in every take. You know, talk about how do you feel about, you know, people using these devices and thinking, oh, now, you know, in lieu of a sound recorder, it's because, oh, we've got this, we don't need this now. What would you say to them?
I mean, I think that kind of thing happening is inevitable, and I think it's kind of, it's going that way with a lot of different things, and it's going that way in sound too, and prosumer sound kind of gear that's out. Things are getting cheaper. You're getting more channels. I think I think there's a time and a place to use a sound recordist, and I think there's jobs that don't warrant a sound recordist. If you can get out there and it's a simple-ish shoot, and you're comfortable with the sound that you'll be getting. Anderson, we talk about this quite a lot with jobs scaling, and there's a lot of kind of maybe venom in the sound community about not using a sound person, but if you have a small job with a tiny budget, like, I totally understand why people are going out as an operator. It saves so much sort of logistical stuff. Most of the jobs that I get called in for now are more complex, or people just don't want to think about sound. They just don't want to think about it. And I've done a bit of shooting in the past, and for me personally, like, if I'm trying to work out how an image looks, I can't be thinking about how that image sounds as well. It's two different areas of the brain, and
What would advice you give to camera operators or filmmakers that they love working in a team, or they want to work in a team with sound recordists? Is there anything technically they should look out for when they're making their camera purchases, if they are planning to work with the sound recorders, or say it's something they want to expand to start to do? What advice would you give them when they're, of what they should look out for?
From a technical point of view, you mean? Like, literally?
Yeah, yes.
Camera.
Let's do both. Let's do technical and then otherwise.
Well, I think from a technical standpoint, if you want to be super sound friendly, XLR ins, like I was saying before, kind of standardized inputs, and time code ins, and also cameras that don't just have the inputs but also have the firmware to support that stuff. And I only say that because a lot of the time cameras come out with these, they come out with the connectors, but the firmware hasn't quite caught up with the camera manufacturer's ambitions yet. And sometimes, the time code just won't jam, and it'll be some sort of firmware issue that'll be updated in a couple of months. But it really depends on your workflow. Sound recordists will record separately now all the time, and as long as you're happy to do the post work that needs doing, with the workflow that you've chosen because you've chosen a certain camera, then it's kind of more of having an awareness in the workflow, and I guess just keeping in mind that kind of time saved on set doesn't necessarily translate to time saved in the edit. When it's coming to workflow sort of stuff. So you're considering the whole package from start to finish. You want to make it as clear and as kind of transparent as possible. But from a non-technical standpoint, it's just communication. If you're starting to work with a sound person, just let them know what you want from the shot, and eventually a relationship will build up, and just it's kind of common sense stuff, really. If they're struggling, and it goes both ways. Communication goes both ways, obviously. So, if the sound person flags an issue to you, just kind of how can you work as a pair to kind of get around that issue and make sure that you've got the kind of stuff that you want. I think it's about being collaborative, not combative. And if you jump from that standpoint, you're always gonna get something, and hopefully get something better, because there's two of you working on something to get something good rather than one person working to get something good. So that'll be my advice, really. Collaborative,
not combative. I love that.
Yeah, let's stay on the advice, but now let's switch it to someone, someone's looking to get into sound, or they've just finished uni and they're looking to get more experience, and it sounds like you've had a really good journey. So what advice would you give to someone that's just starting out today?
So the advice that I'd give would be, definitely don't do it the way I did it. Get someone who can teach you, and let them teach you the mistakes they made so you don't have to make them. You'll always be in situations where you will make mistakes, and that's just something, it's the same for any job. That's something you have to just sort of deal with, decide that you use those mistakes to learn from and move forward from. If you're making the same mistake over and over again, you're doing something wrong. But other than that, I'd say get a mentor. If you have the ability, do TV and dramas and get used to working with the crew. The sound crew, still only really has 3 or 4 people in it. Even though the camera crew would be huge, but if you can get a 6-month or, a season on a TV drama, they will teach you so much about stuff. And again, then you've got a place, any questions that you have, you can ask, you can see what kit they're using, you can try out different kit and mics and see what you like the sound of, watch the workflow in action, see what people do in situations where the problems happen. All of that stuff will be stuff that took me years to learn, that you can learn in months. So if you want to fast forward it, I'd definitely recommend getting on having a mentor and sort of, listening to them. The other way is to do it yourself. Get on shorts, develop a thick skin. Listen back to your rushes at the end of the day. If you think you were having a problem with something at the time, go home, listen to the rushes, see if it's a problem on every channel. If it is a problem on every channel, think about how you could have done that different. Read on the internet is so good now for forums. Podcasts like this for a start. Forums, JW Sound Group forum was a massive resource for me when I was starting out. I used to just spend hours on a night at that, just reading different people having different problems. It's quite American centric, but so much of the stuff crosses over anyway. Especially like technology wise. There's a few kind of on set kind of behaviors that I guess are slightly different in the States, but in general, if you read those forums and you can get a lot of help from those people. There's some really knowledgeable people in there as well. Sometimes even the manufacturers of the gear will come on and answer questions, so you can't really get any more kind of in the know than that, really. And learn about film as well, like learn about camera and learn about art department, learn what everybody else does, because the more you know about what other people are doing, the more you're going to be able to work with them as well. You need to have a respect. If you're asking for respect from other departments, you need to be respecting and understanding what other departments are doing too. Especially people like art department are your friend, costume, wardrobe are your friend, because when you're trying to put mics on people or hide plant mics around the set, you need a relationship with those people to say, is there a way that we can do this, that we can, make this work together for both of us and stuff? And I think that's the other thing to say is that, and we've not touched on that at all yet, but, the technology is really, all the technology is a tool, right? And it's a tool to get a job done. And to do a job, you need to understand what your client, what the director is looking for, So what does the director want? Then you pick your tool that'll do that job for them. So, don't get carried away with the idea that you need the best kit and, you can't beat a well-placed microphone in a good spot. Is going to with cheap gear is going to beat the best gear on the planet, And the important point about that point is you just need to understand that the technology is a tool to get the job done, and the rest of it comes down to people skills and to kind of getting what you want while everyone else gets what they want.
Brilliant advice.
That's valid across all departments, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's collaboration. You're just you're a small part of a big machine, and you've got to work together. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned is like, don't come in and expect that you're more important than someone else. You're not.
No, don't.
You're just as important as everyone else, and it's only through working together that you get the best results. You're never going to be able to just do it all and take it all on by yourself and get like excellent results. You really need to just work as a team.
Yeah, for sure. If one of the departments is struggling, right, that's your product at the end of the day, and it's going to show up, and the whole production value is going to drop because of that.
Everybody's there at the end of the day just to do a job, to make a film. We're not there to gain clicks or department wars or whatever you want to call it. It's the movie, I've started saying movie, almost got all American, I guess. The film is the most important thing. and the film and the relationships people have during that process. If your relationship on set isn't good, for me, I believe that affects the product. I know some people say you have to suffer for your art, and you do, but you suffer together as a team, and not as suffer as in this person made me feel like crap on set, this director put me down, this producer made me feel like this, or didn't pay me on time, whatever. It's literally, you're all there to make this and make this product, to make this film, to make this content, commercial, whatever you want to call it. Be good to each other. Work with each other. Don't work against each other, because it's a false economy. I've said it a million times, I'll say it again. The people, the most important thing on set, not the kit, as much as this is an equipment podcast. And you got to treat everyone well, because then they'll want to come back and they'll want to work hard for you, and they'll want to, and you work hard for them.
And the other thing is, this is a great job. It's the great job that we have. Like, and Mark, you say this all the time to me. Like, we are so lucky to be doing the job that we've got. Like,
100%.
Let's not make it worse for no reason.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in a factory out of school, and I'm not saying that just wasn't for me. It's not fun. You stand on your feet all day long and you're doing the same repetitive thing over and over again, and to go from that to this, sometimes I do have to remind myself, and I've said this to you as well, Anderson, right, is that sometimes if I'm feeling down, or maybe I'm not where I want to be, you have to remember where you've come from, and where you could be, or what you could be doing. And I know so many people that don't have as interesting a job as I have, and get to do all the creative things and see locations that you'd never see, like under Tower Bridge and stuff like that, and going to these weird places that no one else has access to. And you do just have to remember, sometimes it's hard work, it's not easy work, and sometimes it's long hours and long days, and you're tired at the end of it. But there's a lot worse things you could be doing than working in this industry. So why would you want to not make it fun, right? Why would you want it to just be this stressful environment that you hate? Because that's not you don't want to get up in the morning and go to that environment.
You don't. No, you don't.
And I guess on that point as well, and going back to kind of what to do when you start, is find people that you like working with and then stick to them. You have to do a certain amount of moving around, but if you find people that you like working with and you do good content together, and it's a good day, that's going to make your working life so much easier. It's going to make everything easier.
I mean, it sucks for the guys that are trying to get in, because I'm like, sorry, I've already got my team. But it's, but at the same time, no, but you're right. You find great collaborators, and you stick with them as much as possible, and, Kyle knows I've had to use other sound recorders when he's unavailable. I'm like, you sure you can't just move things on? But no, but you always come back to the relationships that you're strongest on, because you've been together through so much. And Mark, your point about just appreciating and enjoying what we do, getting that perspective is so important. Not to bring our personal lives into this, but my wife does not work in the industry. I know Kyle's life is the same. They don't work in the industry, and they have a wider perspective of things that are actually really bad. And it's like, that client that was a bit moany, or that shoot that went over, in the big scheme of things, it's not, I could be doing something a lot worse. And if I hate it, why not just stop doing it and do something completely different with my life? So just, we have an incredible industry. It's an incredible art form that requires this team to actually make it come to life. I just think that's a beautiful thing, and enjoy it. Enjoy that process. And on that note, guys, we're going to wrap it up here today, because it's been a fantastic interview. Kyle, thank you for giving your time, spending your time, imparting that knowledge on us. It's always a pleasure, my friend. You've got some exciting things coming up as well as this podcast.
Thanks again, Kyle. Thanks so much for coming on. You know, every time we all work together, we just have a blast. It's just the best situation, and it is those kind of times where that's what you want to aim for, right? You just want to aim for those scenarios where you're just genuinely like, yeah, this is going to be a fun shoot. So yeah, thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Don't forget, guys, like, subscribe, come back again. And anything I'm missing, Anderson? I feel like I'm missing a big thing. Anything?
You can check us out on Instagram. Instagram. I'm Films by AW. Kyle, what's yours? Your Instagram?
Ambient Pad, my Instagram. Can you put that in the show notes?
Yes, we will.
Yeah.
And
Kyle's got a great Instagram, a really good Instagram. Kyle's got loads of animals. He's got chickens and everything, dogs. So it's a fun Instagram. And we're also on iTunes now. So you can view us on iTunes or podcast, the app. So yeah, come back again next week. And thanks for tuning in.